Welcome, Bruins. Welcome to the 2022 Changemakers Summit, Emotional Labor at Work. This year is our second annual summit, and this might sound like a broken record, but 2020 was a catalyst for many of us. But it wasn't a wake-up call for all of us. Recognizing that many of our Bruins, many of you here today, have been championing work rooted not only in values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but more so change for all. Our alumni leaders, our staff and volunteers alike, rallied to create a space for you, our change makers. This isn't your introductory or typically a professional gathering, conference, or summit. This also isn't your introductory DEI workshop or conference. We know Bruins, like many of you here today, are beyond that. We know we are preaching to the choir, but also know it's incredibly important, particularly in our current moment, that we need to take care of each other and take care of this choir, especially if we want this choir to continue to sing the melodies of change. We know that those steeped in facilitating change, no matter what the size, do it for many reasons. Let it be a sense of duty or passion. It's work, and it's really hard work. It's work that goes beyond the physical. It's the work of our hands, our heads, and our hearts. And that's why we want to talk explicitly about emotional labor tonight. We want to render this often invisible work not only as visible, but uplifted. My name is Patricia Youngwing, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. For my visual description, I have long black brown hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt and gold necklace. I serve as the Director of System-Wide Alumni Engagement at the University of California Office of the President. And I also want to thank my fellow staff members here across the system, and particularly here at UCLA, who took the time to uplift the planning and created this special space for all of us today. So, you are with the choir today, and a goal of ours is for our change makers in attendance like you to build community with each other. If you are comfortable, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, rename yourself to include your graduation year and pronouns. Also, in an effort to make this event accessible, Zoom live transcription will be on. You may view the transcription by selecting View Full Transcription in the live transcript menu of your Zoom toolbar. To kick off the experience, I would like to first begin with a Lan Acknowledgement. UCLA acknowledges the Gabrielino Tongva people as the traditional land caretakers of the Tavangar, the Los Angeles Basin, and Southern Channel Islands. As a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the Honukvetam, our ancestors, Ahihiram, our elders, and the Ihohiantram, our relatives and relations, past, present, and emerging. We know many of you may be joining us from various locations. If you'd like to see what native lands you are currently occupying, you can do so by visiting the link in the chat. And I also want you to encourage you, beyond land acknowledgements, that our UCLA Alumni Association is one of the few campuses to have an American Indian Alumni Association. I encourage you to learn more about what they are doing, which includes addressing issues of campus climate for Native American and American Indian students on campus. In addition, I want to acknowledge UCLA Health for their generous support of our summit. As a presenting sponsor of this week, we are thrilled to be partnering with the organization. You can learn more about their diversity and equity efforts in the link in the chat. We also want to thank our sustaining donors, the UCLA Alumni Associations, whose donations make programs like the summit possible. We encourage you to join the UCLA One Changemakers Summit group to continue the conversations in between these sessions and after. We encourage you to connect with other participants to share best practices and your experiences in the places where you work. And on to our proverbial fireside chat. I'm humbled, honored, and thrilled to introduce two change makers that we all know and adore. First up, the president of the UCLA Alumni Association, Dr. D'Artagnan Scorza. Dr. Scorza currently serves as inaugural executive director of racial equity for the Los Angeles County. In this capacity, he's tasked with championing the elimination of structural racism while also promoting efforts to deepen the county's work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not an easy task. Dr. Scorza's life work is centered on building leaders who fight for equity in communities and schools. In his previous roles as executive director of the Social Justice Learning Institute, a UC Regent, and president of the Board of Education for the Inglewood Unified School District, he launched programs that help youth of color become social justice leaders and college graduates. He also helped pass policies that prioritized over $160 million for student services across the UC campuses and secured $350 million to support schools construction for K-12 schools. As a U.S. Navy Iraq War veteran and civic leader, he has received numerous awards and accolades, including being recognized and was one of the 40 emerging civic leaders under 40 in 2018, and of course received the UCLA Recent Graduate Achievement Award in 2016. Dr. Scorza has been quoted in multiple publications such as the New York Times, LA Times, Huffington Post, Los Angeles Magazine, and several podcasts. Dr. Scorza, thank you for your service in so many ways, and we're so excited to hear you continue your musings on this topic, given it was a topic of your closing keynote at last year's summit. Joining Dr. Scorza in this chat is the president of the University of California, Dr. Michael V. Drake. Dr. Drake was appointed the 21st president of the University of California in August 2020. He oversees UC's world-renowned system of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 nationally affiliated labs, and more than 280,000 students, 230 faculty and staff, and yes, over 2 million alumni. Dr. Drake previously served on the president of the Ohio State University from 2014 through June 2020. Prior to OSU, he served in several roles at the University of California, including 9 years as a chancellor of UC Irvine and 5 years as a system-wide vice president for health affairs. An ophthalmologist by training, Dr. Drake received his AB from Stanford University, his MD and residency from UCSF, and his fellowship training in ophthalmology at UCSF and Massachusetts Eye and Ear Infirmary. What's special about today's chat is that Dr. Drake and Dr. Scorza are not strangers to one another. As change makers that have made and will continue to make change, they also share a special relationship as a mentor and mentee. As someone that called many of my own mentors and mentees during the moments of 2020 to have some real talk and find support where I didn't have to exercise emotional labor of the relationship, I'm eager to listen in on this special conversation. There will be some time for Q&A via the chat functions of this webinar. And without further ado, here's to our change makers in conversation.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for the opportunity to be here today. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this incredible evening where I have the both honor and pleasure to be in dialogue with you, President Drake. Someone who I've long admired and considered to be a leader, not only in your own field, but in higher education. Tonight, folks, we're going to have a fireside chat. This is really intended to be conversational with the goal of, being open, right? And in many ways, just being vulnerable as we think about what it means to do this work in our own places of work, but also as we think about all of the lived experiences we bring to the table and how those lived experiences interact with our professional environment. So with that being said, President Drake, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us tonight and really appreciate you being here as well.
Well, great to be here. Nice to see you always, and looking forward to our chat.
Same here. We're going to open up tonight by just talking about these ideas of what it means to be the first, right? The first, African-American president, the first, man to do this, the first person to do that, right? Firsts in 2022 seem to be a really interesting concept, but because we know that, it comes with both opportunities, but it also comes with challenges. So for you, President Drake, given your leadership and your experience in the UC system and beyond, what is it meant to be the first? What are some of those opportunities and challenges for you?
Well, I appreciate it. It's you sort of see things from your own perspective and not from another perspective. And I remember one of my sons was a runner in high school, and then in college ran cross country, and he was actually a very good runner. I'll not be modest, he was All-American. His college team was national champion, so he was a good runner. So he, particularly in middle school, he would win his races routinely. And what it meant when he was winning the races, they'd say go, and then he'd be running, and within a few seconds there's no one in front of him. He would be out front, and then it was cross country, so you kind of had to follow. You go off in the woods a bit and come back. And I remember this particularly when he was 12 years old and whatever. He hadn't been maybe so good at following the instructions about where the course was supposed to go. So I'd always have some fatherly anxiety in watching. But it reminded me, I think of that when I think of what it feels like to be a leader. When you're leading something, you're in front and you're not following anyone. You're not following a pathway. You're not following a cookbook. You're actually making your own way. And you do that by gathering inputs, processing those inputs, making decisions, and then acting on those decisions before you have a chance to really necessarily check them with everyone. Like, again, this, I hope you get the image of this 12-year-old running off out into the woods by himself and having to make all those decisions. So I'd say that if I look back on my career or different things I've done, I can see that, gee, I guess I was the first one to do that. But it always felt like I was looking at no one in front of me of any type. I mean, tomorrow at work, there's no one in front of me, you know, and so it's just been that way for a long time. And I think as we create our lives, we to the extent that we're leading our own lives or being leaders in the environments that we're working in, we are taking in information, processing that information, and making decisions and moving forward. You can look back again and see that, oh gosh, when I did that, no one else who was like me had done that before. But I was always really focused on the task, I think. And yeah, so that's why, yeah, that's how it seemed to me.
No, I appreciate that. And I think I really love the analogy of sort of charting your own path, right? And the idea of being able to both find your way, but also, you know, in some ways having to be brought back to that path, right? I think, as you mentioned, that sort of fatherly advice you would provide for your son, there was a voice there for him to provide guidance, and sometimes that voice is not always there, right? When you're first. But I guess the other question, you know, as a part of the other side of that coin is, you know, what are the challenges that come with that? You know, I think I can imagine, you know, when you know, we name someone as being the first this for whatever the reason may be, the first woman, the first transgender person, the first African-American person, the first religious person to do this, right? It really, in some ways, shapes our social narrative, shapes our society's narrative. And in other ways, it to me builds upon this idea that, you know, why does there have to be, why is this first thing happening in this day and age, when, you know, we live in a society that in many ways proclaims and professes to you know, provide equality for folk, right? So where do you think you know, these challenges with being the first come from, or, you know, what does it you know, present for folk as they think about, you know, why it's taking in some ways so long to have representation in these positions of power or opportunity?
So a couple of things I'd say. I appreciate it. So one, I'm gonna take you, for instance. You know, you're the first one to live your life. You know, so every day is you're living your life as yourself, and that's a unique experience. You're creating that path moving forward, which all of us do, in living our own lives day by day. So I think that's a thing. I'd say the experience that I have more of it is the firstness doesn't occur, honestly, to me. The only kind of occurs to me. So gee, I'm invited to a space for something. So I'm generally believing that I'm supposed to be there, to be, if I can be honest about it. I mean, that's been my, whatever, that's what I've expected. But I notice when I'm there that when there's nobody else, and much of the time, and that would have been, again, it could be tomorrow, but it would have been 5 years and 10 years and 20 and 30 And 40 years ago, there wouldn't have been anybody else there who looked like or had a similar life experience to me in a broad way. And I think about that, and that can be unusual or challenging in many ways. You know, it's an extra thing to deal with as you think about the where's anybody else. And then I will say part of the work has been all along to make it that the being the first, okay, that's whatever it is, but you don't want to be the last, you know, and you don't want to be the only for a long time. You'd like to do what you can to open opportunities for other people to come in for the good of the entire enterprise. I mean, it makes us all better to be inclusive. So I would have spent more time and energy thinking about inclusivity and bringing people along than I would have been thinking about myself being in some position.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's a really important way to think about it. And I find a lot of value in that. I will tell you, you know, when I think about this idea, right, what it means to sort of in some ways be the first and whatever, right? I'm in this new position here in LA County, the inaugural executive director who's doing this. There's always this to some extent, for me, I don't want to use the word fear, but maybe concern is the best way to put it. Concern that the example that I set may or may not create opportunity for someone else, right?
Yes.
I don't feel like I'm not going to do. I don't feel like I'm going to be unable to do a good job. Like I feel like I'm going to try my best. I'm going to work my hardest. But I also feel like there's this pressure to be excellent all the time.
Yes.
Right. Like you have to be. And in some ways, I think that plays into this white supremacist culture, right? That perfection is a requirement in order to be successful, that we have to, uphold an image of never being able to make a mistake and never being able to let, our colleagues down and, having to be an example that's pointed to. And if you make a mistake, then it can be held over your head and can be used in some ways to say, see, we should have never let that person or that group of people do that, right? And so while I very much appreciate the perspective that, we have to think positively and bring that to the table, there are moments where I always wonder, like, will my failure cost future progress as well, right?
Yes.
Will that set people back if I don't do well amongst this body? And so I don't know if that's something you've ever experienced, but I can say for me, it's a constant sort of feeling. And I know for me, one of the things that sort of I place a lot of pressure on myself around, right? Like if I don't get up and I don't work hard and I don't push, knowing that I'm tired or I'm gonna, I can run into a wall, right? If I don't push, then the outcomes and the results of failure are too great, either for me to bear, but moreover, maybe not for me to bear, but for my community to bear. So I don't know if that makes sense or what your thoughts might be about that perspective as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this, so the concept of being the first or being out front means that there's first this vibe of an expectation of failure, that you're not supposed to be there and you're supposed to not succeed. And that's always there in the minds of some. And then, as you say, the concept that when you have great responsibility, you got great opportunity to make a difference, but you have also the opportunity to not make a difference. So maybe this is my coping mechanism. I just work on making a difference, and just try to do it day by day. I was trained as a surgeon, and I did eye surgery. That's what you do, and it's delicate and precise, and you can't make a mistake. A mistake has consequences, not for you, but for the patient. And so the concept is you have to do a good job every day, every patient. And I bought into setting a high standard for myself and then doing a good job. But I was really thinking about not what others would think of me, but about the task at hand and my own standards for wanting to do a good job. And if I may say, I mean, I would say today, to reveal something, I mean, there's things I do that are great. And I mean, I don't mean great like, whoa, they're great. I mean, that I like doing and that are, terrific, and I enjoy that a lot. There are other things that I don't particularly like as much, the different things that you want to do more or less than the other. I just try to do a good job of the task at hand for the purpose of doing a good job at the task at hand. And I try not to have external expectations evaluate me. I'm older now, and I'm at a place where I don't need them to give me, I don't need anything from whoever they are is. So I really do focus on trying to do a good job for the joy of doing a good job. And I guess where I was going with this, I want to work hard to make it that I enjoy the work that I'm doing, so that the drive to do a good job in that work is also a drive to be fulfilled and engaged in a way that I would want all of us to be in a given day. So and try not to let the external forces be too dominant.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And I love the idea of doing good for goodness sake, right? Just do it because it's the thing that you love and enjoy. I really appreciate you lifting that up. And you also talked about this idea of what it means to be the only one. And so I guess I wonder, what it feels like, and what maybe not necessarily what it feels like, but what are some of the unsaid things that are going on when you're in that space and serving as the only one? So you sort of talked about that to this, in this previous answer, right? But when you are in that space, and in some ways you are the only one, how does this idea of sort of being, doing good and being excellent and addressing the task at hand show up as well? I mean, how would you extend that to these spaces where you may be the only person with your lived experience, which is the way it is, right? We can only represent our lived experience. We can only represent our own story, but you may be the only one with that. But there are still perceptions that others have of us, right? Where they're like, yes, he is position X, or he is, person Y, right? So, or she is that, or they are that, right? So how what's going on for you when you're the only one in that room?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to my own training and education training back in the day. So I felt that the relationship really was between myself and the patient. So between myself and the task. I don't mean to be reducing anyone to a task, but my job was to help that person to get better. And when I was studying for it, I studied hard. I wanted to study hard. I studied hard because I felt that there would be times when I would be inadequate, that I would do my best and it wouldn't lead to a good outcome, because no one can be magical and get a good outcome every time. And I always wanted to, maybe this is psychologically revealing or something, but I always wanted to be that when I failed to get the outcome that I wished, that I wouldn't beat myself up for not having prepared well or not putting in enough effort. So I wanted to study enough to feel that I was prepared for the task, and to devote myself enough to it to know that I'd put in a good effort on the task, and to then allow myself to be comfortable with, if I had prepared myself in an adequate way, not a crazy way, whatever that would be, but in an adequate way, and I was really engaged enough to put forward what for me was a good effort to do this, then I had to be satisfied with the outcome. And the profound nature of that, for me, was that the outcome could be that someone would lose their life or lose their vision, that because I'd fallen short. But it had to be that I hadn't failed to get the outcome I wished because I hadn't done what I would then describe as my best effort. And then once I did that, though, that was the best I could do. You know, I mean, so that helped me not let them make too much noise to get in the way of me being engaged and doing what I thought was a good job. So I don't know if that helps, but that's I'm taking myself back to when I was younger than your age, and thinking about how I sort of dealt with it day by day in a big enterprise. And I kind of really focused on the task and trying to do a good job, and then getting joy in the work was rewarding. So I got joy out of the work, working well. And on the occasions that it didn't work well, I wanted to make sure that I had put in a good effort, and that sustained me during those times.
Yeah, in some ways, it sounds like not only building a level of resilience, but even resistance, right? I think what I'm hearing, and it's really profound, because this idea of being able to be self-assured enough that you can, block out the noise, right, that's going on around you, so much so that you can focus on what's really important, which is what's in front of you. And what is it you're trying to achieve is, I think, a really powerful notion. And I know, that there are a lot of folk who may
Maybe just say something before I forget it. I mean, forgive my rude interruption. I just want to say at that point, I don't want it to sound like, I don't want it to sound like I don't hear the noise, or that it's okay, or, boom, boom. I mean, it's there, and it's something to really deal with. And so I don't want to, in my selective memory of the past, there were times when I felt, awful about things, or I wanted things to be different, but I wanted to make my normal daily step by step, that I was prepared to go in there and do a good job, or know that I'd given a good job, and to have that sustain me, and almost always that works. I mean, that, and even in the face of the noise, that helps us move forward. I didn't want to overstate that, but yeah.
No, I appreciate it. And I think that's what people really want to know, right? It's like, how does someone like you, the president of the University of California, the most prominent public system of higher education in the nation, and dare I say in the world, how does someone like you, right, deal with that noise? How do we deal with the emotional labor that comes from being in these positions and working to, get through those challenges, right? Because I think there's a lot, there's a lot of lessons, there's a lot of wisdom and understanding, how we not only overcome and navigate through these challenges that we deal with, but it also helps, I think, reaffirm the experiences that so many of us have, right? Where, you might be in your workplace and you feel like maybe someone is not being authentic with you, or they are, undermining or trying to sabotage your ability to get something done. Or here you are, as for me as a Black man, right? And I'm in a predominantly white institution, or I'm in a predominantly whatever institution where there aren't people who look like me, right? How do I navigate when someone walks up and they're like, and they do act like I'm not supposed to be there, or they do ignore me when they don't open up the circle when I walk up next to them, right? And they, may not appreciate that I feel like I should be, where it's not inclusive, where it's not open, or I feel like I have to teach them, like, no, don't touch my hair, or, that language is not appropriate in this space, right? So I think people are, there's a level of like, how do you deal with that, right? How do you navigate through that? And yes, while I think it's incredibly important to be resilient, what do I do? What do you do, right? Like, you've made it to where you've made it. How do you get through it all?
Yeah, and again, I don't want to overstate, these things or sugarcoat them.
Yeah.
I try not to let myself down. So I think I'd start there. I try to, and that's why when I was talking about what it was like when I was first trained as a new practicing medical doctor, I tried to make sure I didn't let myself down. So that, I think that's an important thing. And then I would say that let me share something else that a colleague shared with me once that's not quite right, but it occurs to me in this moment. This person was president of NYU years ago, and he was talking about protests that were being directed at him. One of the protests he remembered was that his children were in grade school at the time, and the protesting group showed up at the grade school with pictures of him saying that he was a bad person at his children's grade school, so they would see it when they walked into their fourth grade class or whatever. Your dad's a bad person, and he said that it was painful and hurtful to have that happen, and nobody likes that, but he had to remember that the protest was aimed not at him as a human being, him as a person, but him as his position. So his name was, what it was, comma, and then his job, and that the protest was aimed at the part that came after the comma, and it wasn't him that they were protesting as a human being, because they didn't know him and weren't evaluating him as a human being. And so when I think in very difficult circumstances, and everybody has the difficult circumstances, we don't see it for other people. We feel it for ourselves, but we don't see it for other people. I've had a lot of positions over these years, and they've been at different levels over the years, and the slights and the upsets and whatever have changed in many ways, but they're still there. And I can still find them. And I know, and I'll say this with some emphasis, if I want to find them tomorrow, I can arrive on campus in a baseball cap and sunglasses and find them by walking around the corner. I'm treated differently if people know that my title and are part of the employee base than if I'm just a person walking down the hall. So I see that dichotomy, and I just again, I try not to let myself down, and try to set standards for myself that I can meet, and try to direct myself toward things that I want to be engaged in, and to realize that that's worthwhile, and then try to use the support of people, friends, family, the support of the human community that we're all a part of, to help find value in daily life, particularly in times when the people who are challenging for me to deal with. So
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate you sharing that. And it makes me think about, I mean, we're at a, this Changemaker Summit, right? And we're talking about emotional labor at work. First of all, before I move on to the next question, how would you define emotional labor? Is that, how would you define it from your perspective?
I think that, I mean, I have a way I define it. And again, I want to, this is my way of talking to myself. So I want to sound right. I used to, I don't so much these days for no good reason. I used to play golf more. My younger son, who was the runner, was also a really terrific golfer. And so I had wonderful times playing golf with him, and actually with my wife's father. That was a wonderful day with my son and his granddad. So it was a great thing. And there were some lessons on the golf course, that one of which I'll share from a golf course lesson. I apologize that it's from a golf course, but there were some lessons you'd learn. So one thing was, when there was a green, the designers would make it so it looked like you'd hit the ball straight and it would go in the hole, but often it would bend one way or the other. So there were a couple of things that you learned. One is that water flows downhill, and so if you saw water someplace, then the whole enterprise was kind of going toward the water a bit. So the ball, even though it looked like it was going to go straight, it was going to kind of lean toward the water a bit if there was a lake kind of over, like to your left shoulder. And another thing was that the grass followed the sun. So if you're putting with the grass at your back, or the sun at your back, excuse me, the grass is going to kind of be leaning toward the sun a bit, even though it looks like it's just green and flat. And so if there's water to the left and the sun at your back and you're putting the ball is going to turn to the left, even though you think it ought to go straight. And for you to get it into the hole, you got to putt it a little harder and you got to putt it to the right. And so it's more difficult to measure that. You have to gauge it right. You have many more ways that you can miss, but the setup is you got to put a little more effort into it, and you have to be more precise in the way you line it up, or else it's not going to hit the hole. And I think of the extra labor that we have to put into daily life is a lot like that. It looks like it's just a straight putt, but you got to put something extra into it all the time, or else you're going to come up short and to the left. You know, it's just not going to be there. And you know, part of our work, I think, if we can, after we finish, if the next person has a little straighter putt, then that's a good thing. But that's just something I think we've seen, you know, in all of our lives. You know, you got to put a little extra into it because it really isn't the straight putt that it looks like.
You know, it's really interesting. I think that's a great analogy, because that putting something extra into it is a reflection for some people of the mental activity it takes, right? To sustain, to build, to grow, to make it easier for the people that are coming up behind us.
Yes.
But to also just navigate ourselves, right? Like just to get through it ourselves. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And when I think about emotional labor as well, that's what it refers to for me. It's the sort of the mental work it takes to help just show up and continue to do a good job in the face, in some ways, of the challenge, right? In the face of folk who may, maybe speak to me in a way that I don't necessarily feel is respectful, or in the face of people who may make assumptions about my performance, or in the face of people who may, choose to, see me as being invisible, or maybe for some communities in the face of erasure, or yes, in the face of not being acknowledged for who they are, right? If you're, someone who's, for example, transitioning from one gender, you decide to be gender nonconforming, and you show up in your workplace, and folk don't want to accept you for who you are, right? So to me, this idea of being able to show up and navigate through those spaces and maintain both the wherewithal but the energy to continue to show up and put in that work over and over again can be an incredibly laborious thing. And it brings me to this past 2 years and what we've been dealing with in COVID, right? And how, in many ways, folk in our systems are having to navigate through this pandemic, and as we move into the endemic phase of it, how folk have been asked to do more in some ways with in the environment that we're in. So, given that the theme of this Changemakers Summit is focused on emotional labor at work, how would you say that the past 2 years has impacted what we experience as emotional labor?
Well, a lot. I mean, there's a lot packed into it, and again, I think if there's a place where I've sort of tried to put blinders on things, it's that the energy that people put into seeing me not succeed. I try not to give myself over to my resentment of that energy, such that I then don't succeed because of it. So if there's somebody who's trying to stop me, I don't want to stop myself just to stop them from stopping me. I mean, so I want to make sure that I'm engaged and I succeed to my standard. I don't mean to ignore or discount the fact of those headwinds, and then I don't want to sound like that. But I say also I want to make sure that I press through and not let the fact that they're making that noise to take me from the task. I mean, I think that them, so I just try to tune those things together. I don't want to, this is something I heard years ago, that I didn't want to stop myself from being successful because I thought someone else was trying to stop me from being successful. And I was going to do their work for them by not pressing through. I want to always try to make it that I can press through. And again, maybe it worked well for me. Since I was able to focus on patient care early on, I had a primary person that I was working for. And I felt that it was irresponsible of me to not do what that person needed at that time to get them to where we were going to go. And that helped me to stay focused on those things moving forward. I'd say that the pandemic has done several things. It's disrupted everyone.
Right.
And so in that, if you remember at the very beginning, many of the first people who were ill with the pandemic were in fact the socioeconomically at the highest level. Prince Charles, I mean, there was a special cadre of people who were at the very beginning before it found its way into our communities and then exploded across the inequities in our communities. But it's been a very interesting pandemic in that way, and it's I think disrupted it's disrupted everyone and everything, all the things we're doing, and required us to kind of invent new ways of dealing, and I believe put people on edge and put people under stress and has everyone appropriately concerned. And it also took away from us I mentioned the nurturing of people and family that's so critical. That's the kind of recharge that I think we all need on a regular basis. And it really made that maybe one of the biggest effects of the pandemic is it took the ability to recharge with friends and family away. Your ability to hug people, was dramatically influenced by this. And I think that has made us all be a bit isolated and really has been at a cost. I hope that it seems as though things are getting better. I hope that this is not another false start, that we're able to stay at a low level, get down to a very, very low level and stay at that very, very low level so that we can come back together as people, because I think that all of us have the different scars of moving through our lives, and we need to have ourselves recharged and rejuvenated by the human support of our communities.
Yeah, that's a great way to even think about how we can recover in this sort of post-pandemic world, right? And I also think about all the nurses and the doctors that have talked about their experience. When I think about emotional labor, I think about folk that have said, look, this has taken a toll on me mentally because I'm providing care for folk and I'm seeing them pass. And, we told them to get these vaccinations and we tried to help folk, recover, and we tried to get them treatment. But, for some people who were on the deathbed, they wished that they had done it, or they wished that, that there were different circumstances, or maybe I lost a loved one in all of this. And because sometimes it's not even about them, right? It's just about how life is showing up for us in so many ways. I could have lost a parent, and I had to go back to work, and people could be incredibly supportive, but it still doesn't mean that I'm not dealing with the mental taxation associated with that loss in my workplace, right? So I think it's important for us, at least as I think about it, emotional labor is not limited to what it means to be in an environment where we are also coming under attack, but moreover, what it means to just show up and do our job sometime in the face of adversity, right? In the face of circumstances like the pandemic. And what it means to press on when you have that commitment, even to healing people, to supporting folk. And that's your job, right? Your job is to do that work. It reminds me in some ways of how we talk about vicarious trauma, which is the process of change that happens because you care about people that have been hurt or you feel committed or responsible to help them, right? And, I wonder how we can navigate through that sort of cumulative or even ongoing set of experiences that change our psychological, physical, and spiritual well-being, and manage through that, especially in light of the current circumstances where you may not be able to recharge. So how would you, what do you recommend to people that may be experiencing that level of sort of emotional labor, in some cases vicarious trauma, for some folk in our medical community? What would you recommend to them that they do to try and cope and navigate through those challenges and circumstances?
I guess a couple of things. One, I would always think it's important for all of us to acknowledge that it's real and for them to acknowledge that it's real. And then to, I believe, be present with the fact that their reaction to it is a normal reaction to the extraordinarily unusual, abnormal circumstances that they are coping with. So I think first to recognize these as real challenges that are in fact difficult to deal with. I think that's one. Two, I think that the support of friends and family, the spiritual support, the support of our community to surround us and help us is critically important all the time. So we were talking early about the importance of, even in those days, things like this. I mean, conversations with people, even if you couldn't be with them, that you were seeing them and communicating with them. So staying close and staying in touch, I think, was very, very important. And I think all the things that we do that we know are the right things to do to take care of ourselves, to get exercise, to all those kinds of things, to support ourselves, those things are all important. And in times of particular trauma, it's particularly important to think of those things. And I do that myself. If I have something that's bothering me and things come up from time to time, in the day that are a nuisance and that are bothering, I have to remind myself to not get into the cycle of rehashing those things that are the ones that I'm stuck on, and to step outside and, to go through some of the practices that help us get centered. And I just think that as times are tough, and you did, it's a different conversation, you're in combat, all these things are accentuated, they're right there, they're very real. And you have to have a way of steeling yourself and helping guide yourself through for the good, again, for your own self-preservation, for the preservation of the people who you're in charge of or working with. I mean, that sense of that small or that fraction of the larger community that really is most closely associated with you. We all have to be connected with those people and that part of our community that really supports us. And I think as times are tough and we're under stress, it's even more important than ever.
So given that, and given, I think, the way in which you've helped to lead the UC system, how do you also celebrate success? Like, how do you lift up those moments where we have, been forged in fire and have come through on the other end? So how do you celebrate success?
We have things that we've worked on that we have worked on for a certain purpose. And what's great is that we can see that purpose has been achieved, or those things are working well. I'll use our time together. We back when you were a student regent, we were working on a program called Prime at UC Irvine and around the state. And it was great for me to come back 12 years or so after 14 years after that had gotten started, to see the program was not only starting, but it was now orders of magnitude larger. And where there had been a half a dozen or a dozen students, there were now hundreds, then more than 1,000. And they were out, and then knowing that 1,000 people out practicing medicine were seeing 1,000 patients each a year. So that's then 1 million patient contacts that have been impacted by the things that we wanted to teach people so that they could provide better care. So I look at things that we collectively invested in. That's just one example. And over time, when those things have worked, I appreciate that. I'd say also, I have appreciated the relationships that I've had with people. I'll be really strange and tell you of a dream I had. This is psychologically weird, but I'll tell you about a dream. I had when I was in Ohio, I had a dream. And I remembered it, and I mentioned it to somebody. And it's vague and faded, like dreams are. This is not too long ago, but the dream was that I was walking by a field where people were playing kind of softball or baseball or something, kind of in uniforms and whatever. And then it turned out that I was walking actually onto the field and then kind of in the dugout or whatever with the people, just kind of was doing that. And then the people there in the different baseball uniforms were people that I'd worked with in the past. And the feeling I had is that they were glad to see me, you know, and that like that I was a member of a community and oh, hi, hey, how you doing? It'd be honestly like I were in the grocery store and I saw you in the line next to me. I'd say, hey, great, how you doing? What you doing? And so there were several people I saw, and then it just was a dream. And you know, I kind of mentioned it was an interesting thing, and then whatever. And then years later, I came back to work at the University of California after having been gone and thinking that I wasn't going to come back and work here full time again. And I hadn't thought much about the dream, but I began to see people here and there who I'd worked with over the years. And it reminded me of that feeling I had at the time. So I think as we work to establish relationships with people, and those are positive relationships, then you can return to those and it's gratifying for you to see people because of the relationship that you've had with them. As we are, for me, as I've been able to work on projects over time, it's been good to then look back sometimes and see that the projects have actually worked. The gratification of seeing people that you've worked with who you're happy to see happens much more often than the long multi-year projects thing that I mentioned. But that's really that's a good thing, to turn the corner and see a face and have that be someone you want to see. And let me say, there've been people I've worked with who've been a challenge for me and who I wouldn't necessarily want to see so much when I went around the corner, but those are few and far between compared to people who, you know, I had a positive working relationship with, and that's really uplifting on a day-by-day basis.
Well, that's incredible. Well, you know, President Drake, I want to thank you so much for just being able to be here and be in this conversation. We are going to transition to Q&A at this time. So I'm going to ask that I think it's Gloria who's going to join us to offer up a few questions for us today before we prepare to do a few lightning round questions as well. So Gloria, take it away.
Hi, Dr. Drake. Thank you so much for everything that you've been sharing with us, being so vulnerable. Dart, to you as well. I guess one of the questions that has been asked is, you know, in what you've experienced, you've, you know, moved in different levels, just even in the medical field, then going to be chancellor at UC Irvine, then Ohio. You know, what is, you know, one, I guess, tool that you've used practically to, you know, as to guide and mentor others that as they are going through emotional labor, you see them having the impacts of it. How do you, you know, what is something that you suggested to them to say, hey, like, let's turn it into what you've been sharing into that personal action? How do you, you know, use what your personal drive to impact others? Yeah,
let me answer, and then you can correct me, and I'll try to be clear. I would say that I try to be present, and I try to be authentic all the time. And I mentioned to D'Artagnan's questions earlier, in trying to do a good job, that means I try to be present and authentic and then committed to what I'm doing. If I'm working with someone, I try to listen, and I try to listen for them and to them, and to not make it, I don't want this to sound like cliche, but not make it about me. You know, it's about what we're doing. And then I think and I would say I try to do that all day, every day. And that would be, if there's a consistent thing that I would say from the beginning, that's, I think I would have said the same thing 10 and 20 and 50 years ago, you know, that try to be present, try to be authentic, try to carry integrity, try to really try to tell the truth. So important to you want to behave in a way that you can share honestly what you're doing, and you're okay with that. You know, I try to do that all the time. So that's, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for all you're doing to lead our UC community. I want to give you plenty of time to do the lightning round, Dart. We have about 4 more minutes.
Yeah. Well, President Drake, I have to tell you that folk in our audience and others out there will be really interested to hear some of your thoughts and some of your experiences in the form of a few lightning round questions that we're going to talk about. And I'm going to ask you quickly to describe a few things and to also, you know, share your thoughts and share your feedback. So the first question in our lightning round, and I'll probably answer some of these as well, is what is one word that describes your job?
Oh, goodness. It's truly, it's intense, I'd say.
Intense, okay.
Intense is a word I'd use.
Intense is it's a good word. I would say one word that describes my job is, I would say full, or even fulfilling. All right, one word that describes you as a leader.
Well, I can't say intense, but I was going to say another word I was going to say for my job was engaged. And so let me describe myself then as engaged.
Okay, so the job is intense, but you're engaged, and the job is engaged. So you're deeply engaged. The job is engaging in some ways. Is that right?
The job's engaging. Yes. I mean, I feel that we're engaged. Yes, I'm engaged.
Awesome. Okay, quickly, what are you listening and/or watching or reading right now? Like, what's on your desk?
Yeah, I have a book called it's 400. Is it 400? It's up on my nightstand now. I had 1619 on the nightstand. I'll say that was something I was reading, stories in 1619, and it's like 400 stories. I'm forgetting the name at this moment, but it's poems and stories and short stories from 400 years. Also reflective of 1619.
That's incredible. Thank you. I would tell you the show I'm watching right now is Love is Blind 2. Shake is a mess. If you haven't seen it, an absolute mess.
Okay.
Okay. Piece of advice you give to mentees.
To be authentic and to be all the things I mentioned: authentic, engaged, to do your best, but be authentic and engaged. And you know, and mentoring relationships are really important and have been really important to me in both directions. And to be able to be authentic, engaged, and truthful, and bring great integrity to those conversations, I think is what makes them last a lifetime. Yeah.
I've been learning, for me, with the folks that I mentor, that I've been encouraging them to plan for their future. And you know, a lot of folk that I know, especially when you're much younger, and I'm, you know, still learning myself, when you're much younger, right, the world feels like it's in front of us, but there's a point where, hopefully we won't always be as young, right? We'll move into elder status or to, as we become older adults. So plan for that, right? Get ready for that. Piece of advice you give to mentors.
The book is called 400 Souls. I couldn't remember, but it's called 400 Souls. I was trying to remember the name of it. And so anyway, 400 Souls by Abraham Kendi. So ask me the question again.
So the piece of advice, thank you for sharing that. The piece of advice you would give to mentors.
Well, same thing, honestly, to be authentic and to be there, to listen well, to be engaged, and to know that it's not about you.
Okay. And I would say, by the way, the book that I just finished reading and sort of rereading was Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And so that one has been such an incredible book, by the way. If you all are looking for a resource out there, learning more about de jure and de facto segregation that's impacted upon our lives, incredible book. A quote or motto you live by, and then I have one more for you. Quote or motto you live by.
I read a book years ago I liked a lot that was called The Enigma of Arrival by V.S. Naipaul, man born in Trinidad, raised, but then came of age mostly in England, was of South Indian descent, was a writer. And the Enigma of Arrival is the title of a book, title of a painting, also the title of a book, and it has to do with, honestly, going back to where we were at the beginning, being the first, being the only, what it's like when you step off the train onto the platform, as he did when he moved to a different country, and you're there in this world that is foreign to you and to which you're completely naive to. And the book was about how the world changes because you're in it, and your life has an impact on this place that you are, which is in fact your life as it unfolds. And so I read the book several times. I think he's a great writer, and the first paragraph it just means so much to me about how you arrive in your life, and it becomes clear to you as you live it and as you're moving through it. So
incredible. I would say for me, there is no pillow as soft as a clear conscience.
All right.
And then the final lightning question is, what's your go-to happy place? Could be anything, really. That's
yeah. I mean, a couple things occur to me. If I want to be, I have the privilege. I have many privileges. Let me be clear that I know that I have many privileges. One of them is we have grandchildren, and if I think of one of my granddaughters sitting on my lap to read a book, that's wonderful time. Wonderful time.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I was going to say sitting with my kids, being with my children. Like, it's just that is it. I could have nothing more.
Yes.
And I have a newborn too, so just looking at my daughter who's 3 months old, just smile back. It's just like there's nothing greater in the world to me than that. So,
yes.
President Drake, I want to thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Thank you for having this incredible conversation. This marks the end of our webinar, and I'll turn it back over to you, Gloria, who's going to offer closing remarks. Oh, go ahead.
I have one tiny thing. I mean, I mentioned thinking of my oldest granddaughter sitting on my lap reading. I love it when my grandson sat on my lap too. So, I mean, I'm not gonna differentiate between my grandchildren. I was just thinking of, she was the first that we had that experience with, and so that's the place that I was beginning. But I don't want to make sure that there's no any of them are a blessing. Absolutely.
If they're out there watching, I'm sure they know you love them. But
not even without differentiation. Sorry. Thank you. Good to see you.
You too, President Drake. Gloria, thank you for closing us out. Take it away.
Well, thank you both, Dart and President Drake. President Drake, I promise if your grandson watches this in 15 years, you will make sure he knows that you loved him equally, if not more so. So thank you so much 100%. For sharing, both of you, for sharing moments of vulnerability, for when you needed to move yourself through And again, for both of you, for the service that you and the leadership that you give our UC and UCLA community, we are so grateful and honored to have you both represent all of us, our alumni, our students, our community, our staff and faculty. We're so lucky to have you both leading us and at the front. But also know, as you are leading in the front, we are behind you, ready to support and move forward the good work that you're both doing. So thank you both for all of your work.
Well, thank you all very much. Very nice to spend this time with you.
Thank you. And to all of our participants, this is the end of our day 1 of our summit. Tomorrow we have day 2, where at noon we have Caring for Our Community Caretakers session, which will be a great panel of those that are leading our nonprofit communities and how they care for each other and themselves. And so thank you for attending our session today, and we are excited to see you tomorrow. Go Bruins.
Go
Bye,
Bruins.
everyone.
Bruins.